Hey, welcome back to my channel. Put together a little information here on the 95X. I was hoping to get some things fixed here and switch over from the original Betafpv naked GoPro to the God version. So we just got a couple weights here and we're going to get over to the bench. And I just put together some things to maybe help you out if you're having issues with yours, because I know I was with this one. Quite a bit actually. So let's jump over to the bench and get started. Alright, so kind of in the midst of the guts here. I honestly didn't think about filming this just because there's so many different ways I've seen it done, and honestly I haven't seen anybody really show it working very well. So we had, right here's the BEC for Betafpv, a nameless RC, and can't seem to get either one of these working. So I've soldered in a small wire onto the original harness and traced down the 5-volt source. So this wire right here is going to a capacitor on the back of the GoPro. This is a 6 GoPro opened up here. I just wanted to get in here and show you this is the Matek BEC, and we just want to make sure that there's 5 volts coming out. So if you're looking, let me zoom in just a little bit so you can get a better idea what I'm doing here. Okay, so we have the BEC here. Turn this so you can see it. I have the ground going to the GoPro, so I found a place on the GoPro board that has a good ground. And then on the back side, which I'm not going to flip over right now, but I'm soldered a hot line here to the capacitor on the back. So the 5 volts that normally would go into the GoPro, into this, oops, turn this out of your way just a little bit. This connector here is the original pad for the USB-C connector. And then on there's a 5 volt and a negative rail. So I tracked down the 5 volts using that. So I don't really want this as part of the build. It's just unnecessary. So we have the 2 wires here to power the GoPro, and before I did anything else, I just wanted to jump in here and show you that you want to make sure you got 5 volts coming out of here, because if you plug basically I'm just using a 3S LiPo for practice, but this is a 4S LiPo rig. If you plug 4S directly into a GoPro, or you've got a solder pad or something, continuity going across the pad to create 9, or in some cases 12 volts, you're going to fry this thing. So let's just go ahead and check this real quick. Now mind you, I don't have the 5 volt supply yet. This is out of the equation. I just have the ground, but we're just checking our, let's see here. Oops. See if I can hold that light on for you. We're just going to check. We're going to grab ground right here, and then we're going to grab here. So that's 4.9 volts. So we got a strong 5 volts coming out of there. Okay, so we just wanted to make sure of that before we go any further. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this, unplug the LiPo. Okay, and don't forget to make sure your props are off when you're doing this. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put this 5 volt source in, and we'll go ahead and get this thing powered up and see what we come up with. Alright, so before I get started any further, I went ahead and soldered on the 5 volt line to this Matek 5 volt BEC, measured everything, 5 volts, everything's good. Now, before I plug this in to my LiPo, I went ahead and put the body of the GoPro back together, so we have our screen we can look at. And I just have a USB-C connector going to a power supply over here. So let's go ahead and plug that in. And then I initially have a little red light that flashed one time to let me know that power was applied. Go ahead and power that up. And then the camera here, so you can kind of see. It's kind of hard to see that, ain't it? But you get the idea. It's working pretty good there. So let's go ahead and I'll unplug over here, and then we'll go ahead and pop off this connector here. We don't need this anymore. For now on, anytime we need to, we should be able to power it up here. So let's go ahead and test it and make sure we are good to go. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 11, I think it's 11.4 volts going to here, and then 5 volts feeding in. So we had our initial little red beep there. Okay, go ahead and power on, and then take the lens away from the cloth. So we're all good to go. Should be pretty good. Now I'm just going to sit here and let this run for a little bit. I don't necessarily want to allow this to run for very long, but I mean, you got to imagine on a quadcopter this is going to be running for a handful, a few minutes anyway. So if anything in here starts to get hot, I want to know about it now. So I think we're safe to say that we have successfully powered the GoPro completely, separate of any BEC. We're not using these BECs. I don't know, for some reason couldn't get it to work properly. I may end up doing something with this. It was suggested somewhere to cut that off and then put that on, and we'll see. I think maybe I'll end up scabbing one of these buttons, but yeah, let's dig a little bit further. So let me go ahead and unplug here, and I'll show you up close where I soldered in for that 5 volt source. So let's go ahead and zoom in here. So basically I just ran a little 30 gauge wire right underneath here so I could pull this around the board, and then that's going to feed up through. I'm kind of planning on using some adhesive along the way here to put that right about there, and then I just soldered onto the end of that capacitor. All right, so that supplies the 5 volt, and then ground. There's ground all over the place, so I found the most convenient ground. Is right here. That's where the most convenient ground is. I was kind of doing some testing and I put it over here, but I think I'm going to put it back here, and then the hot line will come around and the ground, so they'll be together wherever I end up taking that later. Okay, so let's go a little bit, get a little bit more done here. Our stripped down GoPro here that's not liking any BEC no matter what I do. So plug that in. Got our power going to it, and go in here to our apps, turn on our GoPro, go to control the GoPro, turn on your Bluetooth. Sorry, I have heard elephants above me. So, okay, and then it will say camera found. So now the things are connected here that way. However, to control it, the Wi-Fi has to run. So now we're just going to wait for the Wi-Fi to work. Alright, so this has finally come up. It's frustrating. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it's quick. So we have our image on screen here. Can you see that? You see that now? The image on there. So if you have your video, you can start your recording, and you can see here it's recording. So 2, 3, 4. It's pretty warm. Definitely want to have some air passing across that, since you don't have a heat sink connected to it. It's not too bad. I mean, I can hold on to it and then click off on your app here, and then that comes back to square. So everything's working. Let me zoom in real quick here. All right, as you can see, there's a little capacitor right here. Let me see if I can. All right, as you can see, there's a little capacitor. So I've kind of jumped into on the back side of that capacitor with a 30 gauge wire, and then we can tuck that down in here, just put some 6,000 or something on it just to keep that wire retained in there. It came out of this bottom hole here. Figured I could put a little 6,000 around that. And then the ground, I've just come off the side of this casing right here. Okay. So that way I could tie these two together. So we'll go ahead and we'll get this BEC, probably adhere this BEC somewhere here, or maybe on the quadcopter. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do with that. And then we'll run 2 legs of the BEC to the LiPo. Let's go ahead and get this all buttoned up and get this in the Umagod. So we got this Umagod package here. So we're going to take all this stuff out and we're going to put this GoPro in there. And that way we can get this build done. Right now we got the Betafpv. I mean, look at the profile on that. That whole thing sits up on there. Let me get the case here. So go ahead and get this all taken apart, and then actually I'm going to peel everything out of the frame. We had some new frame, so we'll get that all put together. Alright, we have everything put together here. So started off with the GoPro, the original power supply through the USB-C connector. Just put a little pinhole in the ribbon cable so I could track down the 5-volt source here, and got everything set up, have everything wired up. I'll zoom in here for you in just a second to kind of go through whatever I did. This is the Nameless RC BEC. It seemed that the main control board would get very, very warm, very, very quick. I mean, it kind of gets warm, but it seemed like it was getting really warm with this. So I don't know if there's just a grounding issue. Something between these components weren't liking the ground. That's my assumption. I tried to do the hack with the Matek BEC, supplying power to this BEC, and the app would crash, or it would just indicate that it wasn't working. And then this BEC seemed to work okay, but it was freezing up. So I didn't much care for that. I went ahead and cut the button portion off of the BEC and put that on. So I have the app. We'll go ahead and open up the app and we'll plug it in here. I'll zoom in, get more details, but you've seen the one indicating light, and then we'll just hold down on the mode. So we have 3 indicating lights to know that the power is on. We'll go over here and it says cameras found, so the Bluetooth connectivity is working now for Wi-Fi control. If you can see that. This just takes a second to spool up. So we're all connected now. No, I don't want to do any update or anything. So if you could see, let me get something in front of this so you can see it. Alright, so kind of looking around here on my messy bench. So if I hit the record button, you can see that the app goes into the recording, and then we have a momentary blinking. So it just lets you know that it's recording. Okay, and then we hit it again. It'll rapid beep, or rapid. So now it's not recording. And then in the modes, if we click on the mode, you see photo, and then burst, time-lapse photo, and back to video. Okay, and then if we hit the record button here again, it'll slow indicator light, letting you know. Now the board does get a little bit warm. I'm sure with some air movement across it, that should suffice. unlike this one, this back here, I mean, you couldn't even hold on to this thing. It would get so hot. So let's go ahead and stop recording. And then also, if your quadcopter's out in front of you, you can click on the record button in the app as well, and the indicator light, you know, still performs. So we're recording right now. I mean, the camera's face down in this cloth, but okay. So everything is functioning as it should. So I'm happy, and the temperature is not overwhelming. You know, you can hold on to it without it burning you. It does get warm though. If you have non-calloused fingers, it's gonna get fairly warm to you. My hands are a little rough. So that's it. Go ahead and unplug this. Let's zoom in here. We're kind of done with these BEC boards for now, and we don't really ever need this anymore, because we can plug this in just the way it is here. So I can power it the way I am and plug this in if I ever need to. Hopefully not going to need to do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and zoom in here. Alright, so we basically have our camera running to the main control board, SD card placed in. Other than that, I've just ran the ground for the power supply to the side of this casing. I felt like it was the best place, out of place, during my testing. I didn't want to put it in any of these holes here. I originally had it here on this pin, which seemed to be okay, but it was in the way of putting that connector on and off, and then the other BECs that I would put on and off. So testing. So I kind of ended up with it here, and that's fine. I thought about moving it to here, depending on the mounting that I do. This is a 32. This little piece of wire here is soldered to the Wi-Fi antenna leg that will go attached to your GoPro here, right? It'll push on that continuity pad, and then the antenna is just stuck on the side of the casing. So instead of ripping that all apart, I just took this is a 2.4 gigahertz antenna, so that's 32.8. That's the best success I've had. I mean, you can argue this to death about the length, but 32.8 millimeters is what I found to be the best. And then after I cut it, I just pulled the insulation a little bit, just so there's no exposure of the wire coming out of the end. Now on the other side, I ran the power 5-volt wire up through the casing here, which I plan on putting some 6000 goop, and then I'm going to retain my wire here with some 6000 across here, and then we're soldered into this resistor. Do I need to zoom in even more? 5-volt line goes to that capacitor. So I went across this board. I actually soldered onto this ribbon cable. I just scraped it and put a 30 gauge wire on this so that I could run my tester for continuity. And I went through this entire board, every pad, so every pin out right here. You could see all these little, not here because that's the BEC, but like right here, there's you know, quite a few of them all over the place. I went through everywhere on here, on both sides, anywhere I could see, and the only place that I could get continuity between this 5-volt rail going into the GoPro is this capacitor. I seen on one of the Facebook groups someone had done this as well, so it seemed I'm gonna vote that that's probably the only place that it can go. If you know of a better place for that 5-volt source to feed the board, let me know in comments. I appreciate it. But that's where I ended up going. So let's zoom back out. All right, let's see here. We have our ground and our hot wire coming out, and that's going to a Matek. I recommend this because I use a lot of their BECs, and this is a 5-volt or 9-volt out, depending on if you put a solder junction across this pad here. Let me zoom in real quick for you. So right here is a solder pad to make this 9 volts, which you do not want to do. Okay, you want it to be the 5 volts. Let me turn this around here. Okay, so our GoPro is being powered here, so 5 volts out, and then the ground from the GoPro is here. And then I've just like quickly put an XT60 to a 4S LiPo. Okay, so I have 4S LiPo power coming into the BEC, and then the ground from there, and that's how I'm powering the GoPro. The BEC board, let me get up something to prop that up with. Zoom in here for you. The BEC board is the Betafpv. Here's the other piece of it. So I just snipped it off, just cut the button portion off just behind the O, and then I took a file and made sure that there was no continuity between the traces that you cut. You know, you want to just make sure. So you just file off, make it smooth and rounded. So that's done. I'll put a thing, I don't know, a little drop of nail polish or something on that. And then by doing that, you cut the leg off of this button to record. So you just need to run a jumper from that corner of the button over to the record here. And that gives you back your continuity. And then this LED is your indicator. So like if you ever broke this connector here, which it seems like these BECs are prone to doing something like that because they connect. Oops, let me get the orientation correct. Because they connect to that. I'm not sure why I'm seeing that connector broken so much on Facebook, but anyways, if you had that happen, this would work great for you, and it seems to be working good for me. Hey, if you have any questions about that, let me know. By no means am I an expert. Okay, I'm good with electronics, but this is my first go at a GoPro. I've kind of messed around with it in the past, but just kind of always having issues with these BECs not performing, not seeming to do very well. So we've eliminated all the possibilities of problems, and we know that this Matek BEC is a surefire way of getting this done. So, all right, now that we have the GoPro portion out of the way, it's finally done. We have a Umagod kit. So Tommy's put together this kit that basically slams the GoPro down onto the quadcopter. So let me zoom out so we can get a little better idea of what we're talking about. Alright, so we have the quadcopter, and with the Betafpv board, it's up here, and it detaches by sliding out. I don't know, just kind of done with this idea. Tommy seems to have a really good idea with this kit. So we're gonna take that naked GoPro. We're gonna put this kit together. We're gonna put it on this quadcopter. So it should be pretty wild. The other thing is I have to go through and remove. I don't know. There's some things going on in here. I'm gonna clean this up. So I'm gonna take all these components apart and move them over to a different frame, and just tidy everything up. Hey, I apologize. I lost the audio clip for this video file. So it's a short video clip, but I'm going to try to do my best. But first thing here, what we did is just take out all the motor screws. So, and then there's 4 screws here that retain the air unit, and these screws are kind of longer. Let me show you here. So they're kind of longer screws that retain the air unit to the frame. So once you take those 4 screws out, the air unit falls out of the frame basically. And then there's 4 screws that retains the carbon fiber frame to the plastic frame. So this plastic frame here. So you have the motor screws and then those four screws. And then there's a TPU mount that goes underneath, and you can see that it comes up through these holes, so the screws come down through that carbon frame into the TPU piece. And then on each side there's 2 screws to hold the camera on. So that's all that came apart. And then the frame itself, the carbon frame, onto the plastic frame. So pretty easy. Alright, so we got the top plate here. We're going to kind of lift it up out of the way and kind of done with that for the time being. We got a new top plate, so that's going to be replaced. So we got our ESC here, and took all 4 motor wires off. You see these little connectors. You don't really want to pull them off. You want to use some tweezers like this, where you can get on each side of that connector and pop it straight up out of there. Because those little connectors here, they're JST 2.0 3-pin connector, and if you pull and yank on them and stuff, you're going to ruin those, and then you're going to have to solder it direct, and trust me, you don't want to have to do that. So just be careful pulling them out of there, because they're only, you know, seated in the one time. And then the ESC is held down by these 3 little screws. They got kind of a built-in washer, and they're little Phillips screws. So take all 3 of those out, and you can see underneath here we have a Molex that plugs into the flight controller, and that will supply the power to the flight controller. So you got your power leads here, and then you got your capacitor built into your XT30. So pretty tight little package for the ESC, and we'll get a little closer look at that here in a second. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put that aside, and now we can see our wiring here. This wire here goes to the old Betafpv GoPro mount situation that never seemed to work. And then we have our FPV camera, so that's our Vista CADX combination with the it's quite a long wire, and originally the way this was put in was kind of sticking out the side. So we have our Crossfire Nano, and it's plugged in down here on this little Molex. So we're going to unplug that. The air unit's kind of free. You can get it moved out of here pretty easy. Right now it's still retained in, just by looped around some of those wires. So we'll go ahead and pull this out, and we'll get a closer look at each one of these things too. Alright, so we got our flight controller here. Let's flip this over, and now you can see there's 4 retaining screws on the bottom. So all we have to do is just remove those 4 retaining screws, and we can get this flight controller pulled out. So get that done. Alright, so you can see here there's little rubber grommets holding that in. So you just push your finger on the other side. Try to keep it straight so you don't break anything. Obviously we're replacing this frame, so I don't care too much, and just twist and turn that up out of there. And then the only thing retaining a couple wires is just some tape. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off real quick. Alright, so we got our last little antenna wire to pull out here for our Crossfire Nano. And now the frame's free. We can go ahead and chuck that off into the trash can. And we have our pieces and parts here, and a couple screws for the flight controller. So we got our 4 screws for the flight controller, and then these screws here are for the ESC. So make sure we keep them off to the side. And then we have our air unit, our ESC, and our flight controller, and the antenna for our unit and camera, Crossfire Nano. So all these things are pretty easy to access. Now we can unplug the Crossfire Nano pretty easy. These little grommets, I tell you what, they bounce, and you just barely touch them and they'll go flinging through the air. Can't put them away. So we got our pieces and parts here. Let's go ahead and do a little bit close up. So we'll zoom in on this here so you can see it a little bit better, and we'll go through each piece. Have a Crossfire Nano. Don't really need to do anything to it, so this is pretty easy to kind of relay into the new frame. So, but let's go ahead and grab this flight controller and ESC and get a little closer up look and see what's going on with that. All right, we're zoomed in. See this blue wire right here? All right, so for current sensing right here on the Molex for your ESC into the flight controller, see your ESC plugs in right here. And the first one is VBAT, and then ground, motor 4, motor 3, motor 2, motor 1, and current sensing, because this does have a shunt resistor. Then you have this Molex here for your Crossfire Nano receiver, and it plugs in right here. And this would be UART3. So we have TX3, RX3, your 5-volt and ground. So that's where you're going to plug that into. Alright, so we'll rotate the flight controller over, and you can see here is our UART connections for this Vista unit. Okay, so we have UART1, and it's a TX and RX pads. So we have that connected up. And then lower part of the board here, we have our power supply to that unit, our hot and ground. Okay, no labeling on either side to what exactly that is, but basically you have your hot and ground. And then piggybacked on that is the Molex that runs up to the Betafpv naked GoPro. So this Molex here, you can see here that these two wires have been cut off, and that would go to the DJI controller. And then this one here is the Molex that goes to the Betafpv naked GoPro, which I'm going to end up removing that completely. I'll unsolder both of these and get rid of that extra Molex. And then it comes in right here for UART control for the Betafpv naked GoPro situation, which didn't work. The light would just stay on the whole entire time. So I'm going to go ahead and unsolder that and get rid of that too. So that's the underside of the flight controller, and I'm going to depin those cut wires off of that Molex. So let's go ahead and get that done. We have our hot line, and then we have our ground, and these two lines here is what's going to feed our 5-volt BEC. Now I'm going to take these off and replace them with thinner 30 gauge wire, but I put these on and then realized I'm not going to use them. But you can see here that the LiPo voltage goes in one side and then out the other side for the Matek BEC. And then here you can see the flight controller is all cleaned up. So that's it. Nice and neat. Got our little Molex to go to our Vista unit. And on the other side here we have our Crossfire Nano plugs in there, and then our ESC plugs in here. So we're ready to go with all that. So let me get this thing buttoned up. Just want to jump in here real quick. I think it'd be real easy to lose orientation or how these boards go back together. Okay, we're upside down. The flight controller is right here's the USB connector, USB-C connector, I think. Yeah, it's a micro USB. Okay, so it's facing the other direction. We have our bind button. Here's the rear of the quad, the front of the quad. Okay, so front and rear. We have the silk screened arrow pointing to the front, and the flight controller, in most cases you would say it's upside down. Okay, so we have to make room to push this down in there, and then we can rotate this over, and then the Crossfire Nano is already out of the frame here, plugged in. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 4 screws in for the flight controller, but I just want to jump in real quick and show you the orientation. It's pretty easy to lose, which way does this thing go in. Intuitively you want to put it in the other way around so that the USB is pointing out so you can use it. But that's going to go ahead and get this connector, put it back together, and get the 4 screws in here. We have our flight controller in place, and we have our nano receiver up out of the way. So now we need to plug in our ESC to this Molex right here, and our ESC, I have it upside down right now. Let me zoom in on this real quick. But I'm going to place this, this is a micro 125 JST connector. So this connector is going to go between the naked GoPro and the quadcopter. So if needing to remove the GoPro, we can just disconnect the power right here. And that's all we're going to have, is just the two wires going up to the GoPro. But I'm going to go ahead and solder this in. Not sure exactly how long I need it to be yet. I assume it's going to be, you know, at least long enough to go up to the GoPro, but I think on this end here we should be okay to get some length. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this in to the battery voltage. So we have our positive LiPo, negative LiPo on the other side, the back side of the ESC. Let me zoom in real quick so you can see. So this is basically the back side of the ESC, or the down. We're going to rotate this down, but on the other side the battery leads go into the board underneath here, and then there's pads on the other side, so that's where we're gonna put this connector in. So I'll go ahead and get that soldered in. Alright, we found another issue here. I don't know if you lost video, but the connector, so you have your UFL connector for your antenna, that I took the little strap. There's a little retaining strap that holds that antenna on the unit, and unfortunately when I took the screw out, the whole thing, I could kind of see the underside was wiggling. So I have done my best to solder the UFL connector back onto the board, and I scraped away, it actually ripped the pad off the center for the signal. Both ground pads were still good on the board, so we're able to do this. If all three of them were ripped off of the board, we'd be done. But we went ahead and put a jumper. I just scraped the insulation off, and I put a jumper in there, and then I soldered the whole thing together. So I did a continuity check, and everything seems to be good. Our signal's not in our ground, so yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I'm not a real fan of how that's designed. All right, so we can see here, I got it all buttoned back up. So not a super easy fix by any means, but doable, as long as those two ground pads aren't ripped off. But I have a video in my history here of replacing the UFL connector, and that's the same scenario as anything else. As long as those two ground pads are still available, if you rip them off, then this is pretty much done. There's no way to reattach it. So it doesn't matter if it swivels on this unit because it's retained down anyway, so soldering it all together worked out. So as long as you don't rip that off, you'll be okay. Alright, so we're getting a little bit further here. So basically we have the GoPro Sled. So I have the GoPro Sled all ready to go here. Kind of turning around. Now the BEC, I'm going to end up putting that down inside the quadcopter, but for just an example purpose for now, before I button this all up, I have the 5-volt line channeled through here, have some high temp electric tape here, and then it comes around here, folds up, and then the connector comes out the side. So then the connector will come up out of the quadcopter. So if ever, you know, there's a need to take this off and work on it or do something, you can just disconnect it there. So this line right now is directly to the LiPo, but I'm actually gonna put this in line, and then I'm just gonna stick that, shrink wrap that, and then stick it down inside there. So when the sled is on, that'll go underneath there like that, and that should all, man, too many things in the way. I tell you what, this this build is not for the lighthearted. So the connector, this goes on top. Those two plug in together, and happy. Okay. Of course, I just got the camera zip tied there so it ain't falling all over and wallering around, because the camera holder for some reason is attached to the sled. I assume that then that way your FPV camera and that, you know, doesn't have any jello. So go ahead and get this in, and then we're done. Button everything up and fly this thing. All right, so I guess if I gave my final thoughts, this thing's pretty cool, right? At least the build part of it. I'll try to get some video for the channel, but this is basically what I ended up with. I wanted to mention a couple things that I don't like and a couple things that I thought were, you know, pretty cool. So they have this, I'll start at the bottom. So on the bottom here, they've got, like, you can see it protrudes, so it's kind of like feet. So it's a 3D printed mat, and it protects the flight controller on the other side. And there's some feet, so the quadcopter sits off the ground so it's not dragging on the frame. So that's kind of a neat aspect. So the plastic frame itself seems to be fine. I didn't see any issues with that. Nothing's, you know, banging into the props. I know sometimes these Betafpv frames, it's funny because I'm not exactly sure how old my 75 is, but this is a brushed Betafpv Whoop 75 millimeter with, and this one here actually has a built-in RX. So this one's already built-in receiver. So I have one that's older than this that doesn't have the receiver built in, but they've been making frames for a while, and this thing's pretty durable. I mean, I've beat this thing good. My kids have had a go at it. So anyway, the frame seems to be pretty good. And then this different top plate. Okay, so here's the old frame, and here's the top plate that we were using. And it's quite a bit of construction there and weight. So with the Umagod difference, Tommy came up with something kind of cool. If you see how spongy so both cameras ride on this little spongy system. I will have to admit, there's a couple things I didn't much care for. Let me zoom in here and I'll show you. So one thing to keep in mind is this carbon fiber plate right here screws in. So this mount here screws up through. So they have a screw on the other side here. It goes through the GoPro board. So that screw goes all the way through the GoPro board and goes up into this TPU piece. Okay, this carbon fiber plate here, the top plate, if you will, the most top plate, it would jam against this USB connector, or this connector here, right on the corner right here. And this whole entire board would flex. You can kind of see that I have it ramped up because I actually stuck a silicone gasket in there to raise this up. Otherwise, this leg here would twist. Like the whole thing would be kind of twisted, if you will. It's kind of hard to see. I got it so close up. But I just wanted you to know that frame is pushing against that, and that's no good. So you need to put a little space under there. And then the back part to where it catches, I would have made that just a little bit bigger. You can see that it could have stretched out a little bit more. Maybe had like a grip or something went around here. But it seems pretty secure. I'm not too worried about it falling out. I just honestly, I am kind of curious to wonder what kind of crash the thing can handle, because this whole process was quite permanent, if you will. So I got my nano receiver here on the side. I'll probably take and put a zip tie around it. I really don't need to. That thing ain't going anywhere. But just to keep it from, I mean, honestly, it's not going anywhere. Have you ever used this stuff? If you're on my channel, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that this Gorilla tough and clear is my favorite stuff. I mean, it is great. So shrink tubing and then the casing there, it's not going anywhere. And then here's the antenna modification that I had to do. I had to solder that all in there, so that's all done. That was quite a joy to find. And the GoPro's ready to work. So we have our BEC board here, just kind of cut that off and then ran that little jumper to get this button to work again. So now when we plug in our LiPo, so go ahead and plug in the LiPo. Okay. And then you push on the mode button for just a second. That initiates the power. And then click on record. And then it'll indicate that it's recording. And then when you're done, push on the button, it saved the file, and we're done. So that's all looking good there. Unplug this here. And then the part that I put in here, you can see that connector right there. So that's the connector. So this whole sled, basically these 4 screws come out of the sled, and you can remove the whole sled and disconnect that little connector. The only thing is, though, is that this FPV camera is part of your sled. So I guess you can, just rotate it out of the way if you had to. But if you need to, I got this connector right there. So, and then it's a little bit of slack too. I don't know if I can get the camera to look in there. Oh yeah, right there. You see right there? That little shrink tubed package? That's the BEC. So that's the Matek BEC feeding the 5 volts up to the sled. Kind of everything else is basically the way it was. So I'm interested in taking it for a flight, but I just wanted to get the hardware point out of the way, let you kind of look at how everything was put together, because I really didn't find any good instructions. I mean, I don't think you have to be a mechanical engineer to figure it out, but I mean, it wasn't easy. So maybe just looking at mine would help you on your way. So this Betafpv 95X is done. It's ready to go fly. Looks like we need to set our camera angle a little differently. I think, what is it? This needs to be 10% pitched higher than our FPV camera. Is that right? Let me know in comments. Hey, you know what? If this video helped you out or entertained you in any way, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Man, if you hated it, you give it a thumbs down. It all works. Enjoy the breeze.